Welcome to Podcash, the portable professional development podcast from Cash Alumni. Cash Alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Here's what's coming up.
The privilege of watching a child moving independently for the first time. It's not something that ever leaves you. I've seen it, I don't know how many times, and it's still a deeply, deeply moving experience. And this expression on a child's face when they realise that they are initiating their own movement is just, well, it's priceless, absolutely priceless.
Let's jump in to this week's episode.
My name is Lucy Norris and I'm the Partnerships and Engagement Officer for the charity Designability. And the best way of summing up my job, I think, is to say that every morning there are going to be, sadly, children diagnosed with a condition that might affect their ability to walk. And so my job is to make sure that those children know that Wizzybug is available and, more importantly, that it's completely free of charge.
Well, that's a very exciting introduction. So I suppose on that, can you tell me what Wizzybug is, so that we all know?
Yes, absolutely. Wizzybug is fantastic. I'm going to do my best to describe it to you because it is just the cutest thing you've ever seen. It's basically a very small powered wheelchair, but now I've said powered wheelchair, take that image out of your brain and just imagine the cutest little red car that has a number plate that says Wizzybug on it. It's got little headlights, it's got eyes, it's got a smiley face on the foot plate. So it couldn't look less like a piece of mobility equipment, to the extent that one of our families had a bit of a run-in with a theme park because they said, "Oh no, you can't bring that in there. That's a toy car." And they went, "No, it's not. It's a piece of disability equipment." So that's how good it is it just looks like a really fun bit of kit, but actually it's a powered wheelchair.
That's great. And that does sound really, really exciting. So I know you said that it's for children who may have been told that they're not going to be able to walk in the same way that other children might. What sort of age is Wizzybugs for? Like, who would be using one of these powered chairs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the reason we designed it is because there's nothing routinely available on the NHS for young children. So traditionally, in this country, we think about powered mobility from the age of 5 upwards, and that means that younger children are basically dependent on parents and carers to be able to move around. So they're often pushed around in a buggy, or they might be crawling or bum shuffling a lot of the time, rolling, and it's actually a human right of children to be able to move independently, and Wizzybug enables them to do that. So it's suitable from 14 months, and we say roughly to the age of 5, but it's all to do with their height and weight and different dimensions. So we've got lots of older children still using Wizzybug, and sadly some children will outgrow it before they reach 5, so it really just depends on how they grow. And the other really cool thing about Wizzybug is that it grows with the child. So families are shown when they come for their appointment how to adapt it, and it's dead easy. You don't need any tools to be able to do it. It's all mechanical changes and they can do it themselves. So as their child grows, they can adapt it to meet their expanding needs.
That's great. And you're right, I'd never really thought about it before, but like children under 5 who have a mobility barrier, something
Yes.
stopping them from walking properly, they do get pushed around in buggies. And I've never, although I know that, and I've worked with families who've got children who've got disabilities, and I'd never really thought about why that was a problem.
Yes, yeah, and it's shocking when you do, yeah.
I sort of think about, like, obviously there's no difference between children who can walk and children who can't walk in terms of them needing to learn how to navigate their own environment and like figure out risk and all of those things. So how does Wizzybug help children do all of that? What skills does it build?
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, picking up on what you were just saying, that there was a brilliant piece of research published last year, actually in the States, not in this country, but it applies universally. And it was talking about the fact that routinely we miss really important developmental milestones because children aren't enabled to self-propel. And it was talking about just how important it is for children to experience independent movement. And we're not talking about, we do have some amazing drivers, Wizzybug drivers. I mean, just phenomenal. You just need to look on YouTube and TikTok and all the rest of it to see some of these kids moving around. But we're not even talking about that. Just accidental independent movement is also really, really beneficial and important. And it unlocks all sorts of things. So anecdotally, things like our parents will say the first time they took their Wizzybug to a cafe, there's a mum said recently, and she turned her back momentarily and her little boy drove over and chose which packet of crisps he wanted. And for her, that was huge. And it's something that, those of us who've been lucky enough to have children who've developed normally take completely for granted. And another mum was talking about the fact that previously her child would be picked up and put down at a table in front of two different toys that she could choose. And Wizzybug enabled her to say, actually, I don't want to play at the table today. I want to go and play at the sandpit or whatever. It's just, so choice is a massive thing. But then there's all sorts of other things that, again, you just sort of don't think about until you look at the research, until you speak to families, is being able to join the family dog walk independently. So they're not in a buggy, they're on their own. And we have lovely video clips of children holding hands with their older sibling whilst they go on the dog walk, or holding the dog on the lead whilst they go on the dog walk. And all of that is because they're able to move independently with Wizzybug. It's life-changing. It really is, and not just for the child, but also for the family. And we know now from the research that moving independently unlocks potential for child development. So there's really close correlations with even things like language skills, and also developing a sense of self, because previous to that, if they're constantly being carried or in a buggy, they're part of their parents or their carers, whereas when they're in Wizzybug, they're their own little person. And of course, the other thing, having described, I hope, given a good description of Wizzybug earlier, is that it's such a lovely bit of kit. People come and talk to you when you're in a Wizzybug, and other children certainly come and talk to you when you're in a Wizzybug, because they love it. It's a really, it's a really good bit of kit that everybody wants to have a look at and have a go in. So it's just fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. And thinking about Wizzybugs, I'd sort of made the links between children being able to learn how to navigate their own environment, even just in terms of being able to conceptualize depth and how far away something is, and all of those things that you need to know to be able to move around by yourself and not bump into things or misjudge how much energy you've got to walk from one place to the other, or any of those things. But that idea of developing agency and confidence and be able to make your own choices must be a massive game-changing thing for young children. I suppose whilst they're figuring out who they are.
Yes, absolutely. And being on a more equal footing with their peer group as well, I think is really, really important. And a lot of our families say that that's the best thing, is that suddenly their child is able to participate more fully, and social participation is a huge factor in child development. So being able to kick a ball around the garden, which you can do in a Wizzybug with your big siblings, or being able to go to the park with friends. There's a gorgeous clip on somewhere on our Facebook page, I think it is, of this little boy who just made a friend in the park. Never happened before. This little person came up to sort of, have a chat, and Mum happened to catch it all on camera, and they literally go off sort of into the sunset together holding hands. It's just fantastic.
That's really so, because obviously thinking about the impact that being able to move yourself around can have on everything from your motor skills to like actual development as a person, as a human being. Like, why is it not something that is more widely available?
I would love to be able to answer that question, but I don't know, because to me it should be available routinely on the NHS. Every child should have that possibility for independent movement. I think we're just probably only starting to scratch the surface of how important it is. There is quite a good body of research now, but I think it just takes a while to feed through. And of course, the other thing is they're hugely expensive. Any kind of powered mobility is massively expensive, and children only need them for a short while because they grow. And that was one of the reasons why we not only designed Wizzybug, but decided to make it a free loan scheme. So families just borrow it for as long as their child needs it, which is usually until they outgrow it, and then it comes back to us, and we refurbish it and send it out to another family. And I think probably that's part of the problem is it's just the pure economics of providing very expensive pieces of equipment to families for what is a relatively short period of time. But my real hope is that in the future, every child who needs help with their mobility will have a Wizzybug or something similar, even if it's not Wizzybug, because it's just so important developmentally. It really, really is. And you were saying about fine motor skills and gross motor skills. I mean, all of that kind of stuff, spatial awareness, there's just so many practical things that are really important, because obviously they've got to learn to use a joystick, and we have a variety of joystick heads that children can use. So we'll always find something that suits their particular grip, or the texture might be something that they really respond to. So we've got lots of different joystick heads we can try, and so that's all fine motor skills. And then as you said, the sort of whole concept of spatial awareness and their feeling in their environment, that's all really important as well. And the other thing is, some of these children will go on to use power mobility. So if they can have had all this experience at such a young age, it's hugely beneficial. I love to tell a story about a couple I met at one of the exhibitions that we attend, and they have twins, both of whom have cerebral palsy. But only one of them was going to be given power mobility because he was quadriplegic, and their daughter, they were told, wasn't eligible because she had the use of one arm. Quite what she was meant to do with just one arm, I really don't know, but there we go. And luckily they were very active on social media, and another charity heard about them and said, no, this little girl has to have power mobility. We will fund a wheelchair for her, particularly because they were twins. How can you give one child one, not the other? And when they went to the supplier to pick up this power chair, they were talking to the little girl and saying, well, obviously you'll need to learn joystick skills. And she went, no, I won't. I've been driving since I was 2. And then they said, and you'll have to go on a driving skills course. And she went, no, I won't. I've been driving since I was 2. And they did their seating assessment. They put it, got it all ready for her, put her in it, and of course she just took off, and they couldn't believe it. And that's because she'd been driving since she was really little, so she knew all of that, and she was a fantastic driver. And some of our drivers are amazing. It blows my mind how competent many 2-year-olds are at really complex maneuvers. But I think it's partly because it's so responsive, and also it turns on a sixpence, but they just get it. It's just phenomenal.
I suppose that makes sense when you think about how children's brains are developing to facilitate their movement at that age, where maybe ambulant 2-year-olds, their brain is developing at that point to help them to navigate obstacles and to know how to stack their joints properly when they're doing different things and bending over and standing up. And whereas actually if you catch children at that point in their development, then they can build their understanding of what their body is doing around that functionality of the chair, that being an extension of themselves from that much more sort of fundamental starting point.
I think that's really well captured. That's exactly it. I think it's that getting them at that key crucial point in their development and giving them that opportunity to move independently. And as I said earlier, I think we also need to think about those children who won't ever become proficient drivers, because a number of our children won't ever. But even for children for whom the movement is accidental, so they might accidentally knock the joystick, that's still massive to have that sensation and all that sensory feedback from moving independently, even if they aren't able to make the connection between them doing something to the joystick and that movement happening. That's equally important, and has all sorts of benefits developmentally, and it's fun. That's the other thing. One family had a little boy and he just did donuts. So he just went round and round and round in circles for a whole year, but he loved it. It made him giggle. The parents, loved watching him do that. And in his case, after a year, he did work out how to push the joystick forward, and that would move him forward. And he then did become a functional driver. But it was after a long time of not being a functional driver and just having a great time going around in circles. Why not?
This is Podcash, brought to you by Cash Alumni. For job search and careers advice in care, health and education, why not try our state-of-the-art Skills Miner AI tool? Skills Miner is under the Careers tab of cashalumni.org.uk. That's cashalumni.org.uk.
I don't envy Wizzybug's job though. You must have a really long waiting list. Like, how do you balance that wait for something becoming free with the fact that children are growing and changing and getting towards like the end of the time they might need a Wizzybug? Or how does that work logistically?
That is a challenge. We do want families to apply as soon as possible, because we want children to have the benefit of Wizzybug as young as possible. So the minimum age is 14 months, and we really encourage families to apply as soon as they can. At the moment, our waiting list is absolutely fine. It's all manageable. We say on average it's 14 weeks between 16 weeks, between them applying and actually getting the Wizzybug. So it's actually a very short wait time, particularly in comparison with, most equipment that's available through other routes. So it's not a long time to wait, but yes, definitely the longer they can have Wizzybug, so therefore the younger they get it, the longer loan length they'll be able to have. And obviously that pays huge dividends. I should say that one of the main criteria for Wizzybug is having good head control. So some children won't be able to have it from that young because they won't have developed sufficient head control. So that's just a really important note to make, is unless they've got really good head control and they can, if their head flops forward, they can lift it back up again, then it isn't suitable for them. And that's purely from a safety point of view, and also for their to make sure they've got good posture when they're using Wizzybug, and it's not going to have a detrimental effect or cause any health problems longer term. So that's why we have that criteria in place. So for some children they're going to have to wait a little bit longer, but we'll still give them a loan for as long as we possibly can. Obviously it's a bit of guesswork because we don't know how quickly children are going to grow and develop, but we employ clinicians and they make a judgment call on that. So they'll set a loan length with the family, and then at the end of that loan we'll contact the family anyway to say that their loan is coming to an end. And if they think their child still fits Wizzybug and they're still benefiting from it and they're still finding it useful, then they can apply for a loan extension. And if they have decided that actually they're moving on to their next piece of equipment, then that's absolutely fine. They can return Wizzybug to us, and we don't charge for the return of Wizzybug either. So that's all paid for and covered by the charity.
That's amazing. And I will ask you some more questions about who Wizzybug might maybe not be suitable for through, because I can imagine that there is sort of a set of criteria that mean that people might be a candidate for that sort of support. But from what you've just said about the way that stuff works and the waiting list and the way that things are administered and things like that, you said that you want people to apply as early as possible. Do you find the same barriers with that as you might maybe with a grown-up support service? In that I remember when I first started exploring mobility aids, that there was almost that idea that you should wait as long as possible to try and stick it out. Like, maybe things I won't need it after all. Do you see those same barriers with maybe parents, like, wanting to not almost, people see it as giving in rather than in like receiving support?
Yes, that's a really good point that you've made. We do see that with some families, and sadly we also see it with some clinicians. Families, definitely, there can be a sense of, they've just come to terms with a diagnosis, so that's a huge thing to go through, obviously. And for some families, they don't even have a diagnosis, so that's probably even worse, because they don't know where to turn and there's no kind of pathway to follow. But certainly we do see that they're possibly already traumatized by what they've gone through so far, and they don't want to think of their child needing any mobility equipment, which obviously we can completely understand and sympathise with that. And I think that's another thing where actually Wizzybug is a really great sort of entry level piece of kit, because it is so friendly looking and it doesn't look clinical or medical. And we've made a very conscious decision that our clinicians don't wear scrubs. Our clinics are very sort of friendly environments. They're as non-clinical as it's possible to be while still being clinical. So yeah, that's very much part of our sort of thinking and ethos, that we want it to be very friendly and not to feel like one of the many medical appointments that our families have to attend. And on the same sort of talking in the same thing is, I've come across families in the past where they've felt really bad that they didn't apply earlier, and it's just because they weren't ready. And so we are very conscious of the fact that some families come to us, with that sort of guilt, which is completely unnecessary, and we do what we can to support them. But there's definitely a point at which families will be ready, and all we can do is support them on that journey. And I think also there's not only that not wanting to sort of, as you put it, give in to having to have mobility equipment, but there's also something around, for some people, some families, and again some clinicians as well, that in some way it's going to stop the children wanting to walk. And of course we know from research that the complete opposite is true, and hopefully some of the things we've already just discussed before will sort of explain that. And that if children are able to explore their own environment, if they're able to participate more fully socially and interact with their peers and their family and the dog and go for walks, all that's going to do is encourage them to want to walk, and they're meeting those developmental milestones, and that's just so important.
I can't imagine, how much more it's amplified as an under 5, like the empowerment of. I remember getting my first set of crutches, and again, the narrative around it being that it was a bad thing, or that I was too young to have a mobility aid, or that it would, again, it would make us lazy in some way, and I would use them when I didn't need them, or any of those things. And apart from the fact that they're cumbersome and they get in the way, and you would still always choose not to need them if you didn't need them, it was so empowering to be able to do things that I couldn't do before, that I was more likely to try and do other things that maybe were difficult for us. I can't imagine how much more that would be felt by a child who maybe was doing things for the first time, and maybe actually thinking of it in that way. It's easier to see how it would support children to want to try to reach new movement milestones.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that is interesting is thinking about it just in terms of children who may be able to walk and perhaps already are walking, but the effort and energy required, for a standing frame or a walker. And actually there's a concept called multimodal mobility, which is what we talk about at Designability. And because a child has already got a bike doesn't mean they can't have a skateboard. You know, I've got wellies, I've got trainers, I've got a pair of heels I never wear anymore, but they're there. You know, we have lots of pieces of footwear, we have lots of different bits of kit, and it's exactly the same when it comes to child mobility. So we see Wizzybug as part of a range of equipment that any child might have. And we spoke to a family recently actually, and that was a perfect case in point. So he was learning to walk and he'd got a walking frame, but it was exhausting and he could only go a very, very limited way with his walker. So having Wizzybug was just brilliant. He was absolutely delighted because he could move around with all his peer group, and then when he got somewhere, use his walker for a bit. So it was just a perfect example of how Wizzybug can fit into an overall picture. And I think that's a really, really important message to get across to families as well, and clinicians, that, you know, it's part of a range, a whole suite, if you like, of different bits of equipment that can really enable a child to develop as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's the key word, isn't it? It's enable. It's going to support that child to be able to do, not what it's there to fill the gap, to stop them having to do. I think a lot of the people who talk about like wheelchairs being an easy thing to do have never driven one. But in that powered chair, there's so many other skills you have to be able to develop to be able to do that. It's not something that someone who is used to be able to just walk around would be able to just transfer over and do. Obviously, if you work with older people, you might have seen that transition where maybe older people have had to transition from being ambulant into using maybe a scooter or some sort of powered chair to get around. And it's, again, it can be loads of fun, but that learning how to navigate around using a completely different set of processes in your own brain to figure out space and like how you move around in the world, and actually doing that with your hand instead of with your hips and your you know, all the other bits that would have to move, is a big transition. So again, like thinking about children doing that when they would be developing those skills initially is really cool.
Yeah, and they are phenomenal. I just can't get over it. And obviously, you know, I bore my family with endless video clips of children and Wizzybugs, and they can't get over it either. It's just extraordinary. And we keep saying, you know, I have conversations all the time saying, well, how come it takes us so long to learn to drive as adults when these children just seem to instinctively get it? And again, it's because their brains are like sponges at that age, and they're experiencing it. You know, it's fun and they're in it, and they just, you know, as I said, not all children, but a lot of children just are extraordinary. The way they learn to drive and navigate, and they whiz around and they turn on a sixpence. One of my favourite video clips is a little boy who'd only had his Wizzybug for a week, and the mum was sat on the sofa and you could see him whizzing past, and then he went through this very narrow doors out into the garden, and then you saw him whizzing past, which was hilarious anyway, and then he manoeuvred back in. But then what was really extraordinary was he then went to the end of the sofa, turned right to go past it, and then reversed into the parking space where he parks Wizzybug between the door and the fridge. And it was just, I thought if that was me driving, I'd have had to do a 13-point turn, and he just did it in a oneer, and he'd had his Wizzybug for a week. It was just insane.
That's magic. But you talk about the videos, and there's two things from that. Like, one is about the content of some of the videos, but the first question I've got is, do you think that those videos, which sound like they're absolutely full of joy, do you think that they do help parents to leave some of those fears or some of those sort of that stigma around a chair or around that, like, in air quotes, giving in bit of of making that transition to that child being able to navigate the world independently. Do you think those videos help them to
Yes,
see what that is?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. They're it's really interesting. I'd read a piece of research recently where another charity had surveyed a load of parents, and they said that they were most likely to. It was 79% said they were most likely to trust another parent who'd had experience of a piece of equipment because of that. It's the trusted. I can't think what the expression is, but a trusted partner, as it were. And I think we see that a lot. So there are lots of amazing online groups for parents of, kids with disabilities. And when they share the video clips and their experiences, it's really empowering, really positive, and I think it really helps families to sort of get on board and think, seeing another child having such a brilliant time, or seeing a child move independently for the first time. And when we go to exhibitions, and if we've got a clinician with us, we're able to seat children. So some families come to exhibitions to try out a Wizzybug, and it's extraordinary because everybody's in tears. The people on the other stands are in tears. The whole place comes to a standstill because the privilege of watching a child moving independently for the first time, it's not something that ever leaves you. And I've seen it, I don't know how many times, and it's still a deeply, deeply moving experience. And this expression on a child's face when they realise that they are initiating their own movement is just, well, it's priceless, absolutely priceless.
This is Podcash, brought to you by Cash Alumni. For discounts on everything from Apple products to MOTs, visit the cashback page of cashalumni.org.uk. That's cashalumni.org.uk.
A lot of our audience are people who work with families. So they might be working in nursery settings or in sort of like reception and primary school and places where maybe they've got relationships with families, or there's things that they might be aware of that families are struggling with. And obviously this might be one of those things. How do people signpost to Wizzybugs?
It's a real mixture. It has to be said. So a lot of so originally the scheme used to be a referral service, so they'd have to have a clinician on board in order to apply, and the clinician would fill out half the form and the family would fill out half the form. Because of COVID and the pandemic, we scrapped that because children were waiting months and months and months to even get an appointment with a therapist, and we realised that children are missing out on having time in Wizzybug. So it's now complete self-referral, so families can apply direct themselves online. There are lots of resources available online. So I talked briefly about the fact that we need really specific measurements for Wizzybug for the child, so that we can adapt Wizzybug to be set up perfectly for them and to be sure that it's the right size for them. So there are resources available to explain to families how to do that. But I think in terms of the people that might be listening to this, just encouraging families to have a look at the website, to maybe look at some of those video clips. One brilliant example is there's a lovely mum called Amy who's got the most adorable little boy called Ollie. It does help that he's exceptionally cute. And he has a condition called SMA type 1, and he also has a Wizzybug. And she did the most brilliant takeover of our Instagram, and it's still available on there. And what she did was, over the course of a few months, I am slightly breaking the fourth wall here by telling you this, but over the course of a few months, she videoed sort of half-hour clips in his day. So literally from the minute he wakes up until the minute he goes to bed. And then we put it out in real time over the course of a day. And it's just the most amazing insight into what it's like to raise a child with additional needs, and the number of people involved in his care, and all the things that have to be factored in, but also the difference that Wizzybug has made to that family's life, and how they use it, and when they use it, and where they use it. And he loves strawberries, so he will drive over in the supermarket to the strawberries and won't particularly want to move on because he wants to stay and have some strawberries, thanks very much. And little things like that. So that's a really lovely resource for parents to have a look at and see what it looks like, and what it can do, and how it might change change their child's life and indeed their own. So I think social media is a really powerful tool in this day and age, and I think a lot of families look for that information on websites and on social media. So it's a really good way of parents being able to help support other parents with all sorts of things, not just Wizzybug. But yes, in terms of the people that might be listening, if they can just encourage families to look at the website, the application form is on there. They can fill it in themselves. If we need to, with their permission, we can contact their local clinician. And obviously, it's much quicker and easier for us to do that. I'm not a clinician myself, but we employ qualified clinicians, so it's quicker and easier for them to get hold of them than perhaps for the family to be waiting for an appointment. So that's how it works now, and that's been really beneficial, and it's meant children aren't waiting months and missing out on time in Wizzybug.
Yeah, that sounds great. What we'll do is we'll link the website and the social media in the show notes for the episode, so people will be able to just click on the link if they wanted to have a look in the notes that are accompanying this episode. They can go and have a look at that while we finish our conversation if they want, or bookmark it for later. When you were mentioning getting measured for a Wizzybug there, and talking about people being the right size and setting it up, and like, how does that work? What is is there a lower size limit or an upper size limit? Like, are there different adaptations the same as there might be with a mobility car?
Yes, so there is a minimum size, and there's also a maximum size, but it's very difficult to give those to you because it's all different dimensions. So for instance, for the minimum size, it would be the back height. So we'd need to make sure that the child could reach where the shoulder harness sits, and the shoulder harness itself is adjustable, but they would need to have sufficient back height to meet the minimum setting on the shoulder harness. And then in terms of maximum, again, it might be the hip width is too big, or it might be that they've got a long back, so they've outgrown the headrest, or they might have long limbs, and the foot plate again, that all adapts. It can all be changed, but they may have outgrown it from that point of view. So that's why we need the really precise measurements, just to make sure that it's going to fit them. And then when they come for their appointment, so we hold appointments either at our headquarters, which is in Bath, or at the William Merritt Centre near Leeds. It's in Rodley near Leeds. So those are one of the two places that families would need to go. And when they go, it's a full seating assessment, so it takes about an hour. And Wizzybug is set up perfectly for their child. So it's the seat depth, the foot rest height, all of that, the tilt, the incline, recline, whatever, will all be adjusted to fit them. And even things like whether the joystick is left-handed or right-handed, and what reach there is depending on what mobility they've got in their shoulder. So that's all set up for them. And then they take Wizzybug home from that appointment. And as part of the appointment, the family is shown how to amend that and adjust that. So as their child grows, they can change all those little, tweak all those little measurements to make sure that it's safe and suitable. And again, our clinicians are available online, so they have regular touch points with the families during the course of the loan. So they'll be in touch and just see how they're getting on. And quite often it's things like maybe the child's not driving as much as they might have the potential to drive, so they just need some tips and hints about encouraging driving, and they've got some brilliant ones up their sleeve, like driving over bubble wrap or crashing into cardboard boxes, or I'm giving away trade secrets here, they're going to kill me, but yes, all sorts of little things they can do to encourage driving. And then equally, something might go wrong. Things do go wrong with Wizzybug, as with any piece of equipment, and we've got a fantastic team of technicians, so families can get in touch and say, whatever it is, whatever the problem is. And quite often it can be sorted out over the phone. In some circumstances, we might need to send out a spare part, that we have had dogs eating things. We have had grown adults standing on things that they shouldn't. Things have broken, so we can send out a spare part, and in the worst case scenario we would get the whole unit back, and send out a replacement unit. But as I said, that's worst case scenario, but it does sometimes happen. So there's lots of support in during the course of the loan to help
and
families.
And what a testament to how enabling the equipment is, that adults and children have been playing together in ways that may have caused injury to equipment. That's really helpful, because when you said that, obviously that initial appointment and all of the adjustment that happens, my brain was full of like new shoes and how often you've got to go and buy children new shoes because they've outgrown things. So the fact that adults can adjust the equipment themselves at home to avoid having to go and get all of that done it feels like week, but every couple of months, is great. It's, I suppose, another empowering thing that can be done to support people to really feel like it's theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really easy. So you don't need any tools to be able to do it. It's all really clever little mechanical adjustments, and they're shown exactly how to do it. And we've also got resources online. So if they've forgotten, because there's a lot of information to take in at the appointment, but there's some resources, and they're sent home with a sort of handbook as well. And as I said, we're always available at the end of the phone. So if somebody's really struggling, then one of our lovely technicians will talk them through, how to make the adjustments.
So this all sounds incredible, Lucy. And I know that you've said that it's free for families and that they get the Wizzybug and they can keep it, and then they bring it, like it gets collected and brought back at the end of that loan term. And so how does that work? Are Wizzybug a charity? Is that how are you funded?
Yeah, so Designability is the name of the charity, and yes, we have no statutory funding. We are just like any other charity, so we have to rattle tins and apply to grants and trusts. We did get a large piece of funding from Multimodal, which helped us set up the loan scheme, and that's been really, really instrumental in its success. But yes, we're just like any other charity. And the other thing that we've introduced since the pandemic, because of the cost of living crisis, we now have something called the Access Fund. So any family that needs help with the cost of attending their appointment, because obviously we supply Wizzybugs literally all over the country. So some families have got quite a long journey, and if they need the help with the cost of that, and that can be overnight accommodation as well, because obviously, if you've got a poorly child, they might not be used to travelling long distances, and then it's a long appointment, and they may not be able to travel to and fro in the same day. Families can self-declare, so they just apply as part of the application process. It's not means tested. It's taken, on faith that if they say they need help, they need help, and then they can get those costs reimbursed, and that includes public transport or fuel expenses, whatever means of travel they need. And in some cases, the other thing that's worth saying is if a family aren't able to take the Wizzybug back with them for some reason, then again, we will courier it to their home after the appointment. And again, we'll do that free of charge. So we hope we've removed all barriers to any family applying. That's certainly our aim.
It sounds like you've removed loads of barriers. It sounds like you've really thought of everything that I can think of would be a barrier, or at least are conscious of those barriers to be able to support families who do that and need that help. Is information about how people can get involved to help with fundraising and things also on the website?
Yes, absolutely. We recently launched a new website, so it's really clear now where you go for which bits of information. And yes, if anybody wanted to donate, obviously we'd be absolutely delighted, and you can do that online on the website.
I can just see people sitting formulating ideas for like cake sales and fundraising that they could do for things. So I thought
that'd be amazing.
This has been great. I feel like I've asked you loads and loads of nosy questions. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you were hoping to be able to tell people?
You did mention, and I remembered and thought we haven't talked about when Wizzybug isn't suitable, so we should probably just cover that. Should probably cover that off. So we talked a bit about head control. That's a major factor. We've talked a little bit about dimensions. So So obviously children do have to be the right size for Wizzybug, and it is very small. It's designed specifically for young children. The other thing is, unfortunately, it can't have any medical equipment attached to it. So any child that's on permanent oxygen, for example, unfortunately, it's not suitable, very sadly. It's not crash tested, so a child should never be transported while sitting in Wizzybug. That's probably a very important one to say. And what else? Trying to think what else. Oh, sadly, it's not waterproof and it can't go on the beach, which everybody at Designability is determined that one day we will find a way around that, and that we can make Wizzybug suitable for the beach, because we just think it really should be able to go on the beach. But the reason for both those things is that the motor is actually in behind the wheels. So if water or sand or anything like that gets into the wheels, then that just destroys the motor, sadly. So there are a few considerations, and in terms of children that it isn't suitable for, and things that it can and can't do. And in terms of sort of diagnosis and things, we see a massive range of children. So the largest group are cerebral palsy, and then there's conditions like spina bifida, all sorts of different muscular dystrophy, lots of muscle wasting diseases, and also lots of rare genetic diseases. But as we talked about previously, the little boy with fatigue, he had Down syndrome. So it can be anything that affects a child's mobility, and just because they can walk doesn't mean that they can't have a Wizzybug. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. This has been such a lovely sort of winter, dark day conversation. It's really cheered me up, and I'm definitely going to head over and check out all of those really lovely videos on the social media, because I think that would really help in these dark nights. Thank you so much for your time. This has been really, really lovely.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Dawn.
Thanks for listening to Podcash. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cashalumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and best practice section of the site. That's cashalumni.org.uk.